Hiya, Barbie.
Hi, Ken.
You want to go do a podcast?
Sure.
Jump in.
Ladies and gentlemen, Toa and Matoran, Taraga of all ages, and everyone else, welcome to Binging Barbie. I'm your host, John, and with me I have my co-host. Why, Jay, against me you be nothing but steam. Hot air, as they say. Anyway, this is a podcast about movie tie-ins for toy franchises, and this week we are beginning our series on the Bionicle movies. And we will be talking about the first movie, Bionicle Mask of Light. And joining us to talk about it is our good friend and Bionicle fan, Toa Legend.
Hello.
Yeah, this is exciting. You were the person who got me into Bionicle in elementary school. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Fair. There were a few contributing factors, common friends of ours that got me into it, really.
I suppose we have to talk about our history about the Bionicle toy line.
Yeah. Yeah, this is squarely in our childhoods here. We were in the target demographic.
It was very much like we were right at the age where I feel like we got into it, but also at the same time, in a weird way, we got into it around the same time that a lot of like the older kids were kind of getting out of it.
Yeah.
So we almost hit that sweet spot where it was like I personally missed the like first 2 years of Bionicle-ish.
Yeah.
2 to 3 years. But after that, I was collecting sets and everything for every year going forward and really starting to get invested in the story, where a lot of like friends of mine that might be, a few years older than me collected the first 2 years and then they stopped once the story started getting too complicated. So
Yeah.
kind of interesting.
Yeah, my first sets were from the Metro Nui arc. And then I have sets from pretty much every other iteration except the Inika, I think. And then like the later ones, I missed a couple. But yeah, I got into it because that was the cool thing in our grade was the Bionicle. Started collecting the sets, and then at some point a few years later, my grandparents got me a subscription to Lego magazine. And so twice a year when they came down to visit, and then when I went up to their house to visit, I would get a big stack of Lego magazines, and in those were the Bionicle comic books. So I read the story, but apparently I didn't retain it too much, which we'll talk about a bit when we get into the story here. But yeah.
Yeah. And I got it around a similar time period of like, yes, it's cool to have Bionicles. Every kid had the Bionicle. And I got around it around the time where Bionicle were starting their run, so around 2005, the end of that to 2006. And me and Toa Legend have both talked about our love of Bionicle. In my other podcast name in brackets, me and Toa did 3 episodes discussing why we love Bionicle, as well as going through each year and talking about the sets and the themes and kind of the overall story loosely. So, yeah, I'm going to plug that. Check that out,
Yeah, well, yeah, the lore for Bionicle is quite for anyone who doesn't know Bionicle lore, it is Dune level complicated. Like Frank Herbert's Dune level complicated just in terms of characters and ideas and settings and things going on, and it's just I've been watching Duck Bricks over on YouTube has a 9-hour series of Bionicle lore that I have been working my way through it. It's quite daunting.
Yeah, it's also tricky because like the way the lore is presented, if you're just going chronologically based off of Bionicle's release, the lore is kind of out of order, which I think does their storytelling really well. But if you do want the full story, Duckbricks has a great way of showing it in the actual timeline order. But that can also make it more confusing if you're like I don't know. It's hard to say which one works better. I personally, I think like the release order more, just because it kind of gives you context when you need it. But I think once you have like a base knowledge of Bionicle at all, it's good to go watch that or read up on some of the more niche comics and just get that firmer like background to why things are happening and what is really the universe surrounding the events that you see.
Yeah,
But
it's a fascinating, very very complex story. But yeah, we can get into a bit of the background here. So in the late '90s, Lego was facing financial crisis. So they began exploring ideas for a toy franchise with a storyline to go along with it. And one of the projects that they had was the Boneheads of Voodoo Island, created by Lego employees Christian Faber, Bob Thompson, and Mark Reiber Anderson. The original idea was then taken and rewritten by an outside writer named Alastair Swinnerton, who was brought on board the team, and they began to work on this sort of Bible for the series of all of the lore and all of the different characters. And at some point, it was retitled Bionicle, which is short for Biological Chronicle, and also just sounds cool.
yeah,
And yeah, the series began releasing in 2001 alongside video games, comics, and books, which told the story of the Bionicle universe. And much of it was written by Greg Farshtey, who he was doing the comics and the books. And then there were the video games and then the movies, and it's all kind of very multimedia. That was a big thing back in the early 2000s, was sort of these big franchises that have different mediums that they're
Yeah.
telling the story.
It didn't always connect perfectly. Like
Yeah.
the films are a very watered down version of the actual events of the story. But for a kid like me who didn't know that these characters have a story, this is like you're thrown into this and it's like, oh, that's pretty neat. Okay, wow. Let me buy the book now.
Yeah. I had a couple of the books when I was young. Um, and yeah, I mean, you can find that a lot of this stuff is unavailable officially, but there are websites out there that have access to all of the different games and the different books and everything. So if you are interested in following the story, there is still a way to do that. And yeah,
yeah,
despite Lego still kind of having some financial struggles in the early 2000s, Bionicle actually remained a really strong brand for them, and kept them from bankruptcy. It was sometimes it's credited as the thing that saved Lego from bankruptcy. It wasn't the only thing, but it was definitely a contributing factor.
Mm-hmm,
But
mm-hmm.
then in 2010, it was abruptly canceled due to declining sales. It was popular enough that they brought it back briefly in 2015 and 2016, but then it was canceled again, and there hasn't really been much from the series since then.
yeah. There
Yeah.
have been a few small like tie-ins or references to it.
Most of it is like anniversary editions, like these Tahu figure that you'd got from a
Hmm.
collector instead of buying a different thing. But we're all still waiting for the potential Generation 3 of if they're going to do that or not. Probably not. We'll see.
Yeah, it's likely that if it does come back, it'll probably be nothing like either of the previous iterations. I think it was a for a lot of long-term Bionicle fans when Generation 2 came out, there was a bit of a disappointment in the fact that the story wasn't nearly as comprehensive or detailed. But also, I think Lego knew that and they didn't want something that was too complicated. But at the same time, Bionicle fans were looking at like Ninjago, for instance, which has a good story, even if it's not overly complicated. But they didn't give Bionicle Generation 2 the same effort.
Even though there was like the original show Bible for Generation 2 was as detailed as Generation 1, but
Hmm.
they just felt it was too complicated and probably a little bit too dark for their later upbringing of Generation 2. Which,
Yeah.
you know, history is told. Again, sales matter, and sales didn't happen as much. So bada bing, bada boom, there you go, it's gone.
Yeah. There's also in the past like 20 years, Lego has had a really big shift in some ideologies. Initially, their thoughts were, make as many pieces as you need. I'm sure we're going to use them at some point. And in the past like 10 years or so, 10, 15 years, they've really started to realize, okay, well, there's a lot of pieces that we don't use. We don't need to make molds for everything. We don't need to store these molds. And so, where Bionicle really did well was having these really complex, detailed figures. But the problem was a lot of those pieces were used for maybe one set line, and then never really used again. And so that was a big shift when they switched to Hero Factory and changed from construction to the character creation building sets or CCBS. And overall, the whole ideology around Lego has tried to become a little bit more efficient and just more intentional with their sets. And
Also,
unfortunately,
utilizing more of their brick pieces than
yeah,
the different molds themselves.
yeah. And unfortunately, Bionicle is very different from that in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
So we may see a Gen 3. I think it's definitely possible, but I think it's probably going to be a little while before we do. And it'll probably look very different, but I'm excited for the possibility. I think there's nothing really since the first generation of Bionicle that's really filled that gap in in the Lego repertoire or in really any other media. I think Bionicle has really stood out as its own thing for quite a while.
Yeah, and it continues to be popular. That's why we are covering these movies.
Yeah.
And speaking of which, this first movie, Mask of Light, was released September 16, 2003. This was just 14 days before Barbie of Swan Lake, which we have also covered on this podcast. Um, Distributed by, this was a bit of a jump scare when I saw it in the video, Miramax,
hmm
um, formerly owned by Harvey Weinstein. But this technically means that this was a Disney movie. So kind of a neat little fact there.
Okay.
um, yeah.
True.
But yeah, this was directed by David Molina and Terry Shakespeare, who are animators with very long careers in the industry. Actually, a lot of connections with Disney. Molina started out as an assistant on Disney's Fox and the Hound, but then actually left Disney to work with Don Bluth. There was a After Fox and the Hound, the experience of working on it was so bad for a lot of the people that it basically spawned a whole bunch of Disney's competition. Don Bluth spun off from that. Tim Burton was working on Fox of the Hound, and they're like, "Hey, maybe your style isn't suited for this." So he went off and made Pee Wee's Big Adventure. Um, whole bunch of interesting behind the scenes stuff with that. But yeah, David Molina was one of the people involved with that. And then both he and Terry Shakespeare worked as animators on a bunch of the early Don Bluth projects, so Secrets of Nim, An American Tale, and The Land Before Time. And then in 1989, along with Don Bluth's co-director Sue Shakespeare, they founded Creative Capers, which is a company that does animation work for movies, TV, and video games. They work with Disney, Warner Brothers, Universal, Marvel, DC, Mattel, pretty much any company that needs animation. And yeah, in 2002, they signed on to make 3 CG animated Bionicle movies for Lego. So yeah, this film is written by Alastair Swinnerton, who we mentioned before as one of the creators of the Bionicle story, as well as Henry Gilroy and Greg Weisman. Gilroy is a TV writer who worked on Batman the Animated Series, Kim Possible, and Star Wars The Clone Wars.
Mm-hmm.
And Weisman is a TV and comic writer who created Gargoyles, the comic series that then was turned into a TV show, and also wrote for Kim Possible, Ben 10, and Star Wars Rebels.
And lots of other DC shows at the time.
Yeah. Yep. And then we have art direction by David Molina and Terry Shakespeare, the directors, and music by Nathan First, who has a bunch of composing work, but the one that I recognized was that he was the composer for the Need for Speed movie from a while ago. I think Rami Malek is in that one.
Hmm.
That's all I really remember.
Yeah. And before we actually get into the plot, let's establish some terminology first. So,
Might be a good idea.
probably. So, the Matoran are the inhabitants of the Bionicle world, and they're divided into different elements: fire, water, air, earth, stone, and ice. They worship a deity called Matanui, a being who is slumbering and who will one day be awoken up. The Matoran are kept safe by the Toa, 6 heroes, each corresponding to one of the elements. And the Toa oppose Matanui's evil brother, quote unquote, Makuta, who is trying to keep Matanui from waking up. There are also Taraka, who are like the elders of that group.
Yep,
Um,
this is very basic terminology here, just to kind of get people up to
And
speed with.
yeah, and for those wondering, the names are obviously not English names.
Yeah,
A lot of them are based off of the Te Reo Maori language from the Maori tribe in New Zealand. There's a whole kerfuffle around some of the names in the early 2000s as Lego was trying to trademark some of these names, but they're just words
yeah,
in Te Reo Maori. So there was a big lawsuit, and anyways, from that there was a lot of name changes that had to happen. For instance, initially Jaller was Jala, Jala. They switched him to Jaller. There's, to Lego's credit, they were very respectful about it when they found out, and when they were sued,
yeah.
they became very respectful of it. And they also included a lot of the name changes into the lore. But that's why if you see these names and you're like, this is a weird name, is this just weird sci-fi? It actually, a lot of them have roots in Maori, much like Mata Nui, the great spirit, as it is translated in Bionicle, actually just means big face. Um, so, which
subtle.
has, yeah, lore implications later on, but yeah.
All right. Well, the plot of the film goes like this: Jollar and Takua are two Matoran living in the lava village of Chakoro. The Matoran have enjoyed years of peace, quote unquote, thanks to the Toa. One day, Takua comes across a rock containing the titular Mask of Light. He gives it to Jollar for safekeeping, and when the village elders find out about the mask, they conclude that it belongs to the legendary Seventh Toa, and declare that Jollar must go on a quest to find him. Takua neglects to mention that it was actually he who found the mask, and Jollar forces him to come along anyway. Deep beneath the earth, Makuta senses that the mask of light has been found, and sends out his quote unquote sons, the Rakshi, to stop Takua and Jollar. Along their quest, Takua and Jollar come across the various Toa, each helping them to evade the Rakshi. And while going through a tunnel, Takua gets separated from Jollar and begins hearing the voice of Makuta in his head. Makuta tells him that if he completes his quest, it will result in Jollar's death. And Takua and Jollar arrive at the temple of Kini Nui and are attacked by the Rakshi. Jollar sacrifices his life to save Takua. Takua puts on the Mask of Light and transforms into the Toa of Light, Takanuva. He faces off against Makuta. The two of them fall into a pool of protodermis and emerge fused together, opening the door to awaken Matanui. With the last of their powers, they resurrect Jollar. Somehow. Jollar and the Matoran elders awaken Matanui with the Mask of Light, and this brings Takanuva back to life, somehow, and reveals the location of the lost city of Metru Nui. Somehow.
Yeah,
Somehow.
the ending, I feel like, knowing a tiny bit about the development process, I do wonder if they kind of swerved at the last second to be like, oh, we don't want to reveal the big secret yet, so we're just gonna, set that aside for now. and not pay attention to that. And here's this other thing that our next line of toys is going to be based on.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely like so 2003 was probably one of if not the biggest years for Bionicle, at least as far as like all the marketing efforts that they put into it. Like there was a whole in Legoland, like they got a lot of models, they got a lot of stuff going. They had the Bionicle Jam, which I don't know if you've heard, but is a whole like dance routine with uh singers and dancers explaining the lore of 2002 Bionicle through song and
Oh,
dance,
oh
Oh,
boy.
which is great when they're just talking about Bo Rock and Matoran and Toa. It's so good. It's so 2002. Um, but it's a very big story at this point, and up until this point, there have been books, there have been comics. Um, this is the first time we've actually seen the characters move and talk and breathe outside of commercials. And so this is a big moment for them. At the same time, I think Lego's realizing, oh, we could make this franchise go on for more than 3 years. We don't have to solve the issue now. What if the next movie we actually go back in time, give us time to prepare the rest of the story, and we build this into like this giant epic saga rather than, a 3-year story that doesn't have a lot of detail. So yeah, I do think the end was probably changed from the initial drafts, and that's
yeah,
why the ending is a little,
wonky.
yeah. Not to mention the fact that,
Vague. Yeah.
yeah, all three of the Bionicle movies kind of suffer from this, but Lego, knowing that it is a children's story, doesn't want to include excess violence. And
Yeah,
so the ending of this movie is not a epic fight between light and darkness. It is a sports match, for instance,
Yeah.
which feels a little bit off, but it does tie in well with the setups that are put there in the beginning of the story. It just is a little bit weird when Bionicle Jesus is facing off Bionicle Satan in uh, hockey.
yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
Lacrosse.
Lacrosse.
lacrosse. Yeah, I think lacrosse might be a better example. But yeah,
Yeah,
uh,
I have to admit something. So I went into this movie. I know a little bit about Bionicle from reading the comics as a kid, but really my memories of Bionicle are more just general, like, oh, I remember the different elements and I remember there were the Toa. So walking into this movie, I was like, oh, I'll just watch the Bionicle movie. It'll make sense. I found it to be incomprehensible. This is not the first part of the Bionicle story. This is a sequel, a direct sequel to games and books that have already built out the story and introduced all of these characters. Um, and yeah, to be honest, like we have that opening narration that I think does a pretty good job setting up the basics of this world. But then there's no introduction to these characters or nothing to catch the audience up with the important stuff that has already happened. So it's just I found it to be a lot of new info, new characters, new terms.
Mm-hmm.
It feels very much like something that was written by people who are very familiar with this world and people who know all of the intricacies of the story and have kind of forgotten that not everyone is at the same level as they are, and so they kind of miss the explaining things a little bit. Um, and now I went back and watched the lore videos and kind of got myself caught up. And having done that, it's like, okay, yeah, this is as the continuing part of this story, it does make more sense. But I was a little bit disappointed going in. It's like, oh, this is the first Bionicle movie, and being like, well, yeah, it's the first movie, but it's not gonna actually introduce me to this world.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's very interesting. In a lot of ways, I almost feel like Bionicle 2 does a better job of setting up the whole Bionicle experience in a lot of ways.
Right.
Whereas this movie does a really good job of, I guess, capturing the vibes more than anything about early Bionicle. It focuses, and much to my childhood chagrin, it focuses on the Matoran, the little guys, rather than the Toa heroes. And as a kid, this was frustrating to me, but looking back on it, I think it was the smart move because it still showed off all of the Toa. It still showed off the 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 rock sheet. Even at one point, there's a scene with the bow rock. Um, Very small scene, but it's
Hmm.
there, and it shows off the Makuta and all of that stuff, and of course, the main character becoming this seventh Toa, this shiny mask special set, um, is a big part of both the advertising and the storytelling. But it's also like focusing on the small guys gave us kind of like a window into the world, which I think was smart. But the window, like you said, was kind of already too late. It was showing things that like they probably should have explained way before. In some ways, I almost wish when they released Bionicle 1, it would have been following the 2001 story. And then Bionicle 2 could have told the 2003 story.
Hmm.
And then Bionicle 3 could have told the 2004 story back in Metro Nui. And we could have skipped 2005, honestly. But I like the third movie. I'll have my opinions for that one later, but I'm just gonna say it is probably the most skippable.
Hmm.
Um, but going on this movie, I do think it is hard to get into if you weren't already into a lot of the story. A lot of the story is told, like the previous story is told, especially through their like online games or sometimes through comics. But like if you want to know who Takua is, the main character of the story, you have to have played the games. And not everybody has done that, especially nowadays.
Yeah.
But
I
yeah.
I did not even know there was a game until I started looking into the lore, and then I actually played a little bit of the game. It's a point and click, which I find a little bit frustrating because if you don't point and click on the correct thing, then you can't move forward. Um, but I did play a bit of it, and I do, as you were saying, with this perspective from the Matoran, I think in that game especially, you're getting a very good sense of the world, and from that perspective, which is a little bit closer to how a kid understands the world, of like you're not the one in control, you're just kind of like watching what the adults around you are doing. So yeah, and honestly it reminded me at points of, especially this movie, of Lord of the Rings,
Mhm.
sort of this big epic fantasy quest, but we're following two smaller beings within this world who don't at first seem like the most important characters, but we're seeing how they become important.
Hmm.
Here there's more of a transformational aspect to that, but yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's an interesting way to tell the story, but yeah, I was a little bit lost as someone who had not played the game and was not up to date on all of the lore.
Yeah.
The story is very simple too. Like, sure, it's complex and you have no idea what's going on, who these characters are, but the actual plot is just character needs to find this thing. They go around, bad stuff happens. At the end, they solve this thing. Uh, where in the other films, things get a little bit more complicated and more character based, but it's very simple. But then you have more complex themes of like finding your destiny and your duty, which each of these three films kind of coincides with the three virtues of Bionicle, which is unity, duty, and destiny. This one being the destiny of Takua to become the seventh Toa. But for a kid like me who watched this for the first time, I had no clue that there was a story before this. In fact, for the longest time, I thought, Bionicle started with the Mask of Light, and that there were no sets before. And so when looking through stop motion videos of Bionicle, I see older sets. I'm like, what the heck is that? Who are you? Who are you? And then I get the comics and I'm like, oh, there's more, which is pretty
Yeah.
cool. And then, of course, rewatching everything, knowing all the context, it's like, okay, that's pretty neat. But yeah, back then I was just watching the films because I thought the Toa were cool in their little action segments.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think one thing that the story does reminds me of what Marvel does now, but to a more extreme sense. In that, I think Bionicle did this in a really cool way, where there are details within this movie that carry on from just some of the web flash games that you wouldn't really expect, but it is a really good case of the writers, even writers that aren't working directly with the main writers, just kind of saying yes and going with what the previous people said, even if it is a little bit weird or ridiculous. Takua is used, especially in the first few years, as kind of the viewfinder of the story. He's the chronicler, right? He's the one writing a lot of the stories, because he's there to see a lot of the stories. And because of that, because they want the viewers to really resonate with him, he has amnesia like 3 or 4 times before this movie happens. He's got a lot of mental issues when it comes to memories. But that being said, aspects of the games carry into this movie in a really like fun and cute ways. Like at one point, it's talking about Toa Liwa, the Toa of Air, asks if they had ever flown a gecko bird, and Takua's like, "Yeah, but only briefly," which is referencing the game that he was in as the main character. Or at the beginning of the film, when there's a three-way um, game of Coley, their Bionicle hockey lacrosse. Um, the winners of that are the Gamatoran, the Holly and Maku, which are the winners of the Coley tournament in the uh, second online game. And so they take all these like fun elements and they really have these good references that I'm sure if you were there at the time, there's a lot of references that you're like, wait, that makes sense. Or, oh, I did that. I was the character that did that. Um, but it also creates this issue of, okay, what is the correct media order of Bionicle? Because you can't even say watch order because you have games or interactive experiences. What works? And then also, what is canon? Is the Colgate 3D platformer canon? Is the Colgate toothbrush expansion set canon? Like, what is canon in Bionicle? So it does create this confusion, and I think nowadays we have a lot of good fan projects on the side that help uh, with the canonicity
Oh
of
yeah,
Bionicle. But
especially with the
uh,
second and third films,
yeah,
canon starts to get very questionable for sure.
yeah, yeah,
It's an interesting thing of, because you think of the other major, you mentioned Marvel, but there's also Star Wars or
sure,
Dune, these built up universes, Lord of the Rings as well. This is one where, I mean, Star Wars and Marvel to a certain extent are toy franchises. But with Bionicle, it was created first and foremost as a toy franchise. So it's guided by sort of the toyetic nature of it a little bit more than, I mean, Star Wars has those elements and Marvel has those elements. Dune not at all. But
sure,
um yeah, it's just interesting. Like, yeah, you bring up the Colgate crossovers. That's not that's not something that would ever be a question in Star Wars of like, oh, are the Colgate things canon? But here it's just like it's interesting to see a universe built to sell toys and how that influences the storytelling. not just here, but going forward in a lot of the lore. And it's like, oh yeah, we need to introduce new characters and new settings every few years to keep it interesting and to keep selling these toys. Or
Yeah.
oh, this line of toys sold really well, so let's bring them back. But now they're the super Borak and they're have
Mhm.
powers that they didn't have before.
Yeah. And on top of that, this is one of Lego's first like stories. They
Yeah,
they do have other sets that have stories, but the stories are much more basic prior to this. Um, but this is their first epic story. And
yeah.
so they're kind of trying to figure things out as they go. They're obviously taking inspiration from anywhere they can. Um, but they're also like, okay, our priority is selling toys, but a lot of people like this story thing we got going on. So if we can work those things together, let's do it. But the priority through and through has always been the toys, uh, which makes it interesting for certain story points. But that's okay.
Yeah, we talk about this a
Yeah,
lot on this podcast, the toyetic nature of these commercial I mean, yeah, they're movies that are meant to kind of be commercials. And again, that's not much different from what Star Wars is, but there are sort of corporate interests here that aren't as prominent in other franchises that are just kind of
sure.
interesting to look at and be like, oh yeah, Barbie needs to have a transformation in every movie so that you can sell two different Barbie dresses.
Yeah.
Or
And
Bionicle,
then
we need to have every few years the characters need to get some kind of upgrade.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, exactly. It's also really interesting the way Lego does some of the storytelling is through their sets too. And because the reality is the first like 2 or 3 years, they kind of you can tell weren't expecting this to pop off as much as it did. So they did whatever they could to like make the sets engaging and have kind of story in the sets, not expecting a lot of their fans to be reading the comics for there to even be movies. Prior to this, there weren't a lot of Lego animation type media. Nowadays, it's like all over, but at that point, this I think was their first direct to movie film.
I believe at least in feature length, yeah.
Yeah. So this was very new to them, but prior to that, a lot of the storytelling was done in the sets. I recently watched a video essay from the YouTuber Jet Kuso, and he
mm,
pointed out something that I didn't realize as a fan of Bionicle that kind of started in 2004, but something that's really cool about what they do with specifically the sets for Takanuva and for Makuta is that um, previously every single Bionicle character has had a mask, and the whole game mechanic is they have some sort of rotating arm or leg or both arms, or with the Borak, the head lurches forward, all in a way to try to be able to remove the opposing Bionicle's mask. And it kind of created a little game that, if you had two sets, you could play fight against another person until you knocked off the mask. Um, but the interesting thing about the Makuta's mask or about Takanuva's mask is they weren't connected with a simple pin connection. They were connected with an axle connection, which meant that you couldn't just knock them off. They were fastened onto the faces, which made for some really interesting storytelling on that front. It made the sets feel really powerful and strong, but it added to this overall story. And we see storytelling throughout the set design for all of the sets along the franchise. And as we continue watching more videos, I'll try and point them out as you go. But I think looking at just the sets that they had at the time, just like keeping that viewpoint, it's a really cool thing to do to have just these small elements that convey a lot of big story elements.
Yeah, it's fascinating doing the research into the lore because it's so well constructed for being so massive. And yeah, there's the big twist which we haven't revealed yet for anyone who hasn't experienced it. But when I heard that, I was like, wait a second, they can't have been planning this from the beginning. Then the more research I did, no, that was the plan from the beginning. And yeah,
Mm.
all of the details and the elements, and you can tell that they were really focused on let's tell an interesting and engaging story that is consistent, or as consistent as can be across different mediums, and have, yeah, tie the toys in, tie the video games in, tie the books in, just have as much as possible here. um so
Yeah.
yeah, with this movie, it feels like if you're just going into the movie, you're missing all of that context. You know, you're watching Return of the King without having seen Fellowship of the Ring and Two Towers. You don't
Yeah.
have the and I mean, there are pluses and minuses. I think as it gets further from that initial release, you know, people might be, they might hear about Bionicle and they're like, "Oh, I'll watch the movie." Well, you'll be completely lost if you do that. Um, as opposed to when it was just starting out and there was a little bit more accessibility. You can find the games online, you could find the books in stores. But then at the same time, all of that stuff has been chronicled and saved, and you can find lore videos that explain everything. So yeah, I don't know. I do kind of still wish though there was just the first movie had been a little bit more of an introduction rather than a continuation.
Yeah. I think that's entirely fair.
So yeah, anything else on story?
We pretty much covered most of it, so I have nothing else.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
think I have definitely more things when we get to the characters, but I
Okay.
think overall we covered what I was thinking for story.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. I gave the story a 2.5 out of 5. Again, I was going in relatively blind. And yeah, I mean, even as John was saying, as a story itself, it is a little simple, chosen one quest type narrative. And yeah, it kind of feels a little bit disappointing as an introduction to the Bionicle universe, even though it's not really meant to be an introduction.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that's fair to say.
I gave the story a 3, which is I enjoy the story. I've seen this film enough times where I don't have to ever watch this film again because of just how simple the story is. It's so simple that it's like, okay, I can picture each scene in my head moving forward. It's like, okay, we're doing this journey, and this journey. Um, in a way where other films, like the next two, you kind of have to watch again because they're a little bit more complex in what they're trying to do. But I think it's enjoyable enough overall, so I give it a 3.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah, so I gave it a 3.5, and I think we'll get into it a little bit more when it gets to the character elements. I think as a story in and of itself, if you're not looking at this as the introduction for a lot of people into Bionicle, but as just a continuation of a story, I think with those references and those continuations from the previous parts of the story, it does a really good job of just putting you back into the universe, saying, "Okay, I respect my viewers enough to feel like I don't have to explain everything, um, but I will make sure to focus on these characters and this story." In totality, I see the story of this as kind of like John said, it's a very simple story, but it's I don't think more about the overarching story, and it, I would say it's more centered on the characters and
Mm-hmm.
specifically the character of Takua.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, he's the main character, um, but it's kind of the struggle of self identity versus responsibility, and I think that's for a lot of children, it resonated with a lot of them in really big and meaningful ways that weren't, I don't think, initially planned by Lego or Bionicle or any of the writers, but I've seen the profound impact that it's had on a lot of friends that I've made through the Bionicle community. And so for me, seeing that story and looking back on it now, I think it's really grown on me. As a kid, I didn't really like this movie. I thought, the story in and of itself was okay, but we didn't really focus on the Toa. We focused on these little guys, and we didn't get to see all the cool powers, and the mask powers are barely even acknowledged, and the Toa of Light should have been Jowler, even though lore-wise it doesn't make sense. But it was like, I like Jowler more. He should have been the Toa of Light.
Yeah.
But now looking back on it, I think each of the characters were actually a lot deeper than anticipated, and there are definitely some like cliches that the story plays into. Like Tahu and Gali have this like rivalry from the beginning of the movie, which is kind of explained in the books, but like not profusely. I think they just put it there to be like, aha, boys versus girls. This one's the angry one. Fire versus
Also,
water.
yeah. Also, it's partly due to add the element of the Toa have to again learn about the value of unity and coming together, while you have Jowler, who's already the symbol of duty, what he needs to do. But
Yeah.
before we move on to talking about the characters, we wanted to take a second to talk about our Patreon page. We already have all kinds of exclusive content, including show notes, or a bonus miniseries on Barbie TV shows, and even early access to next week's episode. It's only $2 a month to join, and you'll be helping us make this show the best it can be. So go to patreon.com/binging Barbie podcast and start supporting the show now. That's patreon.com/BINGINGBARBIE podcast. All right, and let's talk about the characters.
Yeah. So our main character here is Takua, who let's just get
Takua.
some background information. Toa kind of already mentioned this, but he was a Matoran who in the game and in the books has kind of traveled around the island as this chronicler. So he's observing things and getting a little bit involved, but sort of on the sidelines, watching as the Toa are originally discovered. They show up from out of space, seemingly. There's lore stuff with that we won't get into right now. But yeah, they're kind of discovering their powers and going about the island, and Takua's kind of interacting or seeing them do their thing. Sort of a sideways view of that story. But yeah, does he get amnesia between then and this one?
He's had amnesia at least twice, from my understanding.
Okay.
Obviously, we'll get into the big amnesia from Bionicle 2 and Bionicle 3, but he did have amnesia right after. He was the one that called the Toa to them. He accidentally activated a beacon, and so all the canisters like kind of moved towards the island because of that. Since then, he has amnesia, and that's how the Bionicle web game, the first one, the Matanui online game, starts. Is he's just had amnesia, and now the game starts, and so that's why some of the characters are like, "Hey, I know you," and you're just like, "Okay." um, so he has, I think at least once, it might be twice, but I believe uh yeah, he's had at least one bout of amnesia that not any of the other Matoran have had.
Yeah.
He does find the Borak cave, and does he forget about that one, or is it just? Oh.
I think he just kind of doesn't tell anybody about it. There, so there's not really any games in between then and the next one, but there are animations. And
Mhm.
that's kind of how they did a lot of that storytelling right there for the Takua storyline is through these Borak animations. It also explains how the Matoran go from these little uh, McDonald's sets, literally McDonald's sets, to the sets that Bionicle sold later. That's explained during the Borak animations. Um, so lots of heavy lifting from those little animations.
Yeah. As to Takua himself as like a character, he's a little bit of a hothead, kind of. He's more impulsive than Jawler, at least. And I like this idea, and I kind of wish they had explored it a little bit more, but that he's kind of constantly in motion as a way to kind of avoid introspection. He has these sort of big questions about his own identity, but to stop thinking about those, he's constantly looking for a new adventure or a new thing to pay attention to. And even the idea of him as a chronicler, he's looking at everyone else's story as a way to avoid looking inward at his own story.
Yeah.
And yeah, Toa, you were mentioning this idea of like identity and how that interacts with the Bionicle world and the fandom especially, and how that has become a very important thing for a lot of Bionicle fans. So yeah, I love that idea. Just wasn't really communicated all that well in this particular story.
Yeah. I think a big part of Takua's story is always feeling like he's the outsider. Like he's not the regular Matoran. And lore wise, he's not.
Yeah.
Everybody else on this island is a Matoran of one of those 6 core elements, whereas he is actually a Matoran of light. That's why the Mask of Light responds to him in that way. That's why he becomes a Toe of Light, and that's also why his foot color changes with every set release. But um, he's very much that different character, and I think for a lot of people watching the movie, that resonated with them as, oh yeah, I feel different than other people a lot of the time, and I feel like I don't really fit in. Um, and some people close to me have really expressed that like Takua was a big part of how they found out about their own identity. And looking at this story, it really helped them assess like, okay, I feel different. Maybe I should slow down and start to think about it. But I do agree the message overall is very, very subtle to the point where most children watching this movie are just going to be like, just kind of seems irresponsible and
Yeah.
lazy. I don't like him all that much. um, but I do think his journey is a really interesting one because it starts with him. You know, a lot of who he is based off of the previous games, especially the Matanui online game. The first one is his story. You play as Takua, and previous to this, he's not really mentioned as like there's no sets of him. There's no characters of him up until I believe this movie where they decided, oh yeah, let's make him a full set. To my knowledge, most of the sets prior to this were initially literally McDonald's toys were the first sets, and then after that, you know, they had a few Matoran as well. In other sets, we of course have the Toa, and then a few Rahi, and then they go into um, the Borak swarms, and then the Toa get an upgrade, and then the Matoran get an upgrade, and that's where we see um, his first set created for uh, this movie tie-in. And so prior to this, he's kind of just been the viewfinder for all of the Bionicle fans through the video games. And in this one, he's finally given a character and a personality. And things that I like about it is he's very much, in a lot of ways, what I think, you know, the average video game character experiences, where he is impulsive. he does things that are a little bit crazy just to see if they work. He hops across stones to get to a mask through a river of lava, right? He tries to surfboard across the river of lava, and when that doesn't work out, he's not sure what he's doing. He's very much like a go-getter, but he's got this like secret amount of courage that nobody else is willing to do. And it's this realistic courage of, when they're getting attacked by the Rakshi, he doesn't, puff out his chest like Jowler and be like, "No, we'll fight alongside you, Kopaka." He's like, "Kopaka said go, we're going. Don't really care about your input. That's just what we're doing now." Um and so he has weird amounts of courage mixed with weird amounts of fear. Um, and I think this whole story is really him coming into himself, feeling comfortable with who he is. And we see it in, I talked about the Coley match, but the initial Coley match does a lot to set up in this Bionicle world. In a way where it's like the Coley match in and of itself is a fun action sequence. Where you get to see this weird sport in Bionicle. You get to see all the cool flips and things. You get to see the Matoran set pieces playing the game that you can play with those sets. Um, but it also sets up a lot for Takua in that he's playing the game as best as he can. And at one moment, he's like, "I'm going to show off this super cool move that I've been working on." And he fails it. And everybody is at first impressed, and then they're like, "Oh, he failed it. Nice try." And certain characters are more supportive than others, and certain characters are a little bit more, I guess, cringed at that. And as the story goes on, Takua starts to accept more and more responsibility. And at the very end, he accepts this responsibility of putting on the mask. And I think for the first time ever, he's finally felt comfortable in himself, his identity, in this new body that he has that isn't trying to be a Tomatoran. It's his own element. He's literally in his own element. And that's the only time, obviously, there's only 2 times that we see it, but that's the only time where his super move pays off is when he's fully comfortable accepting himself. And I think even as weird as having a lacrosse fight with the devil is, it does a good payoff for that storytelling there. And I think it adds a lot to Takua's character for that.
Yeah, I like all of that, and it's stuff that I didn't really pick up on. Both the like his character as being, the protagonist of a point and click game where, yeah, it makes sense he would go over there and see what's there and click around, try and find something. Oh no, he's going over there, he's clicking around. But then yeah,
Yeah.
also the identity thing, which to me that went a bit over my head. Again, I hadn't played the games, hadn't read the books. I am familiar with sort of the way Bionicle is very important to a lot of people in their personal journeys of accepting their identities. But yeah, I like that you're pulling those elements out because it's stuff that I very much missed. Um,
It's definitely like they went over my head for a long time. And then someone was like talking to me about it and pointed it out to me, and I was like, "Oh, those were there the whole time, but I didn't see them at least." But that makes a lot of sense. So yeah, I definitely can't take credit for that, but it's really cool details that I definitely missed that are very subtle in the storytelling. Another detail that is an interesting one that I don't know how canon it is, but the as the story goes on, some people have pointed out that they think Takua realized that he was supposed to be the Toa of Light partway through the movie, which is an interesting take. And in my mind, as at least as a kid, and even now, it feels more like he didn't realize until he actually witness the death of Jowler and puts on the mask himself. But somebody pointed out that the discussion between him and Makuta partway through the movie is framed in a way to the viewers where it seems like Makuta is just trying to scare him and say, you're going to fail this quest. You're never going to find the Toa of Light. But the way that they're saying things, it's kind of dancing around the idea of potentially they're both talking about the fact that, hey, Takua, you're never going to find somebody to offload this duty to. You're never going to find somebody else. It's going to have to be you. You will have to give up your life as a Tamatoran who gets to just explore the island. And you're going to have to accept this responsibility unless you give me the mask. And then you won't ever have to be a Toa of Light. You won't have to be this person. You can continue to be yourself. And I think that's an interesting way to look at it because it goes into that side of responsibility versus identity. And can you accept this responsibility and still be true to yourself? And I think at the end of this movie, Takua, now Takanuva, finds a good balance of the two. And while I do think the ending of this movie kind of doesn't do the best of showing that, Takanuva in the stories beyond this is still very much Takua. He's just a bigger, stronger version of him. In this movie, it kind of feels like when he turns into Takanuva, he's kind of just like immediately like almost somebody else entirely. But I think it's an interesting take to look at it from the perspective of maybe he knew the whole time and he just didn't want to give up who he was to become somebody else.
Yeah,
I think that's fascinating.
Yeah. It's reminding me a bit of, and I haven't seen it yet because it's not out yet, but I have heard a bit about the film I Saw the TV Glow, which is, it's probably spoilers to specify too much of what, and I read a little bit of the summary, but yeah, this idea of identity and the fear of embracing your own identity and change. So yeah, that's fascinating, and I did not pick up on any of that at all watching this, and I kind of wish that they had been a little bit more intentional about pushing that to the forefront.
Mm.
But I'm glad those elements are there and that they have resonated with people.
Yeah.
And yeah, the interpretation that he understands that he is the Toe of Light at a certain point and is just kind of avoiding it, that makes his character so much more interesting and complex. And then when he does finally accept it, like, how does he know that he has to put on the Mask of Light? Well, if he's been thinking about it for a while, that makes a little bit of sense there. And even
Yeah.
his role as chronicler, he's looking at the other Toa sort of almost as a way of maybe living vicariously through them, and then finally getting this opportunity and both the fear and the joy of accepting that identity. Yeah, I wish that more of that was directly pointed out in the film.
Yeah.
And I think if it were being remade today, they would maybe be a little bit more intentional about those elements, just because of how sort of salient they are to issues of identity as we understand them a little bit better today.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even the thing with Makuta is very interesting in this, like, what is he gonna do? This sort of, if he fulfills his quest, then Jollar will die, but he has to fulfill his quest because that's his destiny. Um, Again, I feel the execution there is maybe a little bit lacking, but these are like really interesting ideas to have this character be dealing with,
Yeah.
and sort
I
of
think
makes him more interesting than like the average chosen one.
yeah, I agree. He's the reluctant hero archetype,
Yeah,
which I
yeah,
think can become a very fascinating um, character. I think in general, the runtime of this movie is an hour and 15 minutes.
yeah,
That is including credits. And they this being their first movie, this was they tried to fit a lot into one movie. And while the plot of the story is very simple, it's just they're walking around with a shiny mask trying to figure out where this final Toa is. Um, the the underlying stuff is the more interesting part. But they also know that they're making a movie for children, and so they're trying to fit all of these complex storytelling ideas that they want into this movie, and some of it does stick and some of it doesn't. So I can't fault them for trying, but I do agree. I would love to see, like, if they ever did a remake of this movie, I would love to see them, intentionally focus on certain things a little bit more and not leave it up to interpretation as much as it is right now. Um,
Yeah. And to be fair, that has been a common complaint for me on these with the Barbie movies, with the Monster High movies. It's like they bring in these complex elements, but they're for kids, so they can't really do anything more than kind of vaguely gesture. Yeah. John, any thoughts on Takua?
Uh, no, y'all said it all.
Oh yeah. Next up is his companion here, Jollar, who is
Mhm.
the more sort of responsible one. John, as you pointed out, he is the embodiment of duty. He's the captain of the guard,
mhm.
something like that.
Yeah, that's correct.
I think part of my issue is that a lot of this stuff is communicated more through words than through actions. We're kind of constantly being told that he's the more responsible one, but it doesn't necessarily always come through in his actions.
Yeah, and also they introduce him at the Coley Field, right? He's like,
Yeah.
and our personal captain of the guard, Jaller, and that's good for tying it into like previous media and letting people know who he is. But like as a kid, I was like, what does that mean? Like obviously, that's mostly just me being stupid. But like captain of the guard, what does that really mean for him? Like in this movie, we don't see anybody in the guard referencing him as captain or as with anybody with authority. The most we see is when the village is destroyed and he's told about that. He feels this big sense of regret where he's accepted this duty that is actually supposed to be his friend's, but he's decided, well, somebody has to do it. And rather than just outing my friend as a liar, um, I'll go with him and I'll make sure that this duty gets done. But when his village is destroyed, he's like, I've accepted somebody else's duty, and in doing so, I've dropped the ball on my own. Um, and that's a cool moment, but it really doesn't carry as much emotional impact as I think it should. Um, but I also don't know how they could have conveyed it much more differently either. It's very weird.
Yeah. I mean, even just having early scenes of him actually commanding a group of people might have helped a little bit. Honestly, the way they were set up, I thought, like, when they introduced him as captain of the guard, I'm like, wait, I thought he was like a child. Just the way that they have set up these characters within this world, I thought that the Matoran were, or at least these Matoran were like children. So I'm like, why is he captain of the guard? Why isn't that like a Toa job? Um, and again, I was going in, hadn't played the game, didn't wasn't aware of the story. But yeah, it would have been nice to have a little bit more there in terms of showing his responsibility and his sense of duty. And as you were saying, that moment, which completely went over my head again, I was not considering the sort of psychology of that and what must have been going through his head there.
Yeah. It We'll touch on this more later, I'm sure. It kind of also plays into like I think the voice acting in this movie is most of the time pretty decent, but Jaller is very much the early 2000s like cool character voice. And
Yeah.
that doesn't work with a lot of emotions all the time. It can, but it's mostly the emotion of that's cool or oh, that's not cool. And that's about it. So in this case, it kind of just felt more like a oh no, I should have as a citizen of the city, I should have been there to help rather than oh, that was my responsibility rather than talking to my hopefully girlfriend before I leave the city. Maybe I should have talked to the guards and made sure that they were prepared.
Yeah.
Is love
No.
canon?
Is love canon. That's the if it's not, they're great at flirting for people that don't believe in love.
That okay, well, since you brought it up, that is one of the fascinating differences between this is sort of the first quote unquote boy franchise that John and I are covering here. I mean, the Nolan movies, but that's not toy movies. Yeah, it is interesting how different the priorities of things are. Almost every Barbie movie is about interpersonal relationships, and romance is often one of those interpersonal relationships. And here, Bionicle, we still do have those interpersonal relationships, but romance is kind of like maybe hinted at, but very much off to the side. Um, so yeah, that was just kind of an interesting difference.
Yeah. Of course, John just mentioned about love being canon and whatnot. It the story writers very much early on were like, we're making that not a focus.
Yeah,
We see in the movies there are several points of characters flirting, but the story writers, specifically Greg Farshi, was like, I'm not going to deal with it. This is a sci-fi story. I'll explain the economy. I'll explain, you know, psychology. I'll explain the lore. I'm not explaining sex to 12-year-olds. We're just going to skip that. Which I don't blame him for, if I'm honest.
Also, it kind of makes things a little bit more confusing once we get more into the Barra Magna side of the lore. It's like, huh,
Yeah.
what does how does that work? But if that was the thing, but how do we able? Okay, whatever.
Yeah. Very
yeah.
much so.
Lore questions that get kind of brought up in general. Now, back to Joller. I wrote this note before knowing much of the lore, but I do kind of stand by it, which is that for this movie specifically, I wish that he had stayed dead once he had been killed,
Sure.
because it would have given his sacrifice a lot more weight. In this one, none of the characters that die stay dead.
Yeah.
Like, we have several major, but both of the main characters die, and
Yeah.
both of them get brought back a couple minutes later.
Yeah. And it
And I guess
Yeah,
that adds to the weight of something else that happens later down the line.
that is true. I'll give you that.
yeah.
But I agree with you. Like they have a whole scene where he dies. It's super sad. All the characters are like grieving. They put his mask on Takanuva's like cool like light bike of some kind. Um, and it's like it's very touching. And then he's just brought back to life later, which I get it. It's a kids movie. But then they
Yeah.
also do the same thing to Takanuva in less than 30 seconds too. It's like, okay, one death and brought back to life. I can get it. I don't think they had to kill Takanuva as well, or I guess at that point Takudanuva, which is the whole thing. But on the note of putting his mask on his bike, he also crashed his bike into a wall after putting the mask on it. It's like Takanuva did not care.
Yeah. I guess it's probably a thing to note is that a lot of the reasons why you can't show death on these toy films is partially because of the, I guess, spoilers, but that's like over 30 years now. Optimus Prime dying in that first Transformers film, the
Mm,
80s animated film, caused so much trauma to children that parents were so furious that when they tried to kill off a character from G.I. Joe in their movie, they had to redub the line and say, "Oh no, he's in a coma." And they never show him waking up. They have to do another dub line. It's like, "Oh, by the way, he's awake from his coma." And so I guess now you can't really show your characters dying in
It's
films,
also a toy
but a
thing.
book, you can, I suppose.
Yeah.
Mm.
I think it's also a toy thing of
True.
because that was the thing that made Disney a little reticent to go through with Rogue One. They're
Mm.
worried about toy sales.
Yeah, that's fair. If you kill off
Which
a character, you
again,
can't sell their
yeah,
toys anymore.
I
yeah,
mean,
Or if you do, it's very morbid.
that's half
yep,
the problem. The other half is, are the toys cool enough?
Also
yeah,
true. Yeah, Jowler is an interesting case where I do think the story would, especially Takua's journey to Takanuva, I think would hold a lot of weight if Jowler had died. I can understand why a toy franchise aimed at kids would not kill off their characters, but there is a lot of every single character aside from maybe the Rakshi that are defeated or killed in this movie come back. Makuta comes back. Spoilers. Sorry. Um,
somehow Makuta has
Jowler.
returned.
Yeah, literally. Uh, Takanuva slash Takua comes back. Um, they are all like it's not none of it's permanent, and obviously a
Yeah,
lot of that is Makuta coming back is like that's a storytelling element that's like we were expecting to end this franchise here, but but I guess we never saw him we never saw his corpse, so we can bring him back kind of thing. He's the best villain we got, so let's just keep running with him.
yep. The Star Wars
Yeah, exactly.
approach.
So
No. It's the Bionicle approach. Star Wars
I guess,
stole it
yeah,
from Bionicle.
right,
yep.
exactly.
Although in Star Wars, isn't he a clone? We don't
It's
have time for that.
yeah, that's a whole thing. Goodness.
uh,
Um,
yeah,
but yeah, so with Jowler and Takua being paired together, Jowler being very much the duty bound one, and Takua being the ADHD character who's that point and click protagonist. It is a very interesting combo. I think, from my understanding, they were comboed together, story wise, in that Takua was part of the first the I believe it's the band of or the Chroniclers Company is what it is,
yeah,
where in the first game they go through and they're defending against the Rahi as the Toa are fighting against Makuta. And so I think after that fact, they start becoming friends and then they're kind of forced into this friendship because of the Koli tournament kind of thing. And so they have this like almost sibling dynamic where they're constantly annoying each other, but they're also best friends. And that is very cute, if a little forced at times.
yeah. I wasn't the biggest fan of their dynamic here. Again, it feels very childlike, which this is a movie aimed at children, so that isn't
Yeah.
the biggest issue. But yeah, and also they're just very passive protagonists within this movie. Within the wider franchise, they have a little bit more agency, but here they're just kind of being told where to go, and then something bad happens, so the Toas show up and save them. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
and that's true of like to a certain extent of Lord of the Rings with the Hobbit characters, but they have a little bit more agency, and as it goes on, they get a little bit more competent. Here, it felt like they were kind of being pulled along the entire time. Um, which no, Toa, you bring up all of these interesting story elements, which I think kind of makes that a little bit less of an issue of how these characters are growing and changing throughout the story. But to me, as a sort of newcomer to this, even though I have some familiarity with the franchise, it just that didn't show up for me.
Yeah. I think also Takua really has the main arc of the story, the
Yeah,
main
yeah,
character arc here. And it is told in a very subtle way. Um if it is told at all. I don't know what the intentions of the writers were. It feels like there is an arc there, but also it could just be a, oh yeah, that worked. Sure.
yeah, yeah,
Interpret it that way. Jolly doesn't really have an arc in the same way. He's kind of just himself the whole way through, which isn't bad, but it does leave him a bit two dimensional.
yeah,
Where he's just kind of here to help out a friend, and unfortunately, that friend is not willing to accept his responsibility, so he's having to. Um, and I think that does lead him to be a good. Uh, his death is a good reflection moment for Takua. In that sense that Jaller is very much himself through and through. And even though that got him killed, Jaller doesn't regret that one bit because he was him the whole time. But it does mean that Jaller is just the cool character throughout it. You could replace him with like 2001 Sonic and it would probably be the same vibes. Like
yeah, yeah.
but they have
Yeah,
some fun dynamics. It's just I think you're right in that it is a passive form of being the main characters of this story.
yeah. It's more the story, even though the characters have a lot of important moments, it is more plot driven than character driven. And I think part of that is just time constraints, um, not allowing them to explore the characters as fully as they want to. Which oh, you have something to say,
Well,
John?
I was gonna say, speaking of time constraints,
Oh,
let's talk about all
Yep.
the other characters that we have to talk about for this.
that's probably not a bad idea.
Oh, the Toa. I have no idea who these people are. So Toa Tahu, he's probably the most prominent here. He has a little bit of an arc. He has a little bit of resentment towards his fellow Toa for some reason that we don't quite understand. Um,
It's ego.
and
We all
then
have an ego.
that yeah, yeah. And then
Yeah,
he oh go ahead.
okay. So I did a little bit of research beforehand
Yeah.
because I was like, why? Like, he's okay with Pohachu. He's fine with Pohachu. He's okay with Lua. He hates Gali for some reason. I don't know why. And so I looked that up beforehand. Apparently, there's a bit of like tension between them at the start of this film because the last time they interacted majorly is right before the Borak Kal, which is like the second specialized Borak, show up. Rather than trying to stick together as much as possible, like Gali suggested, Tahu's like, no, everybody go your own ways. It's fine. We handled this once. We'll be okay. And then the Borak Kal come in and proceed to like wipe the floor with them for a little bit before they all come back together and fight them again. And so between that and uh, at one point somebody was saying that um, Tahu was like, "Oh yeah, water is just a stupid element," and so it kind of separates them even further,
Yeah, yeah.
drives a wedge between them. And so by the time of getting to this movie, there's a little bit of like tension between them. And you can see that Gali is willing to move past it, but Tahu's like, I think he's more angry at himself, I think, and he's kind of projecting that onto Gali because he was the one that made the bad call. Um, but he's almost blaming her for it.
He's upset
Um,
that she was right, maybe.
yeah, and so later parts in the movie, um, it's voice acted in a really funny way, but she straight up like he's like, no, I'll handle this. Don't worry about it. And Gali's like, no, no, Tahu, no. And it sounds like she's like correcting a dog, which I love. But she's she's like, no, we have to stay together this time. And this time he actually does listen. He's like, okay, you know what, you're right. Fine. He's still edgy about it, but he's okay with it.
He's also been
And
poisoned at this point, so he's
yeah. So
it's
he's
coming out
not
of him
really
too.
in his right mind. Yeah. Um, but in that sense, I appreciate the tie-in. It's kind of a rough tie-in to the previous parts of the story. A lot of people, when I was researching this, a lot of people in the comments were saying um, that it's probably that they just needed the hot-headed Toa to have a rival, and it made more sense for it to be Gali in this instance than who it normally is with Kopaka. Um, I think they just like having their red characters be edgy.
That
Personally,
is, yeah, that I think has something to do with like color psychology.
yeah,
Um, because yeah, you associate especially with fire, like, oh, that's the hot-headed element.
yeah,
That might even understand the sort of voice acting choices they made with Jollar as well. Um,
yeah. I think so.
yeah, I like that arc, and I wish it had been in the film
Yeah,
because I didn't get any of that context of their relationship and what's going on there. Because that's a smart arc, especially for like a quote unquote boys franchise in the early 2000s.
hmm,
To have this be, oh, sometimes a woman is going to be correct about something, and you have to be able to accept that.
yeah. I mean,
um
speaking just
Sometimes.
very quick, yeah, only sometimes. Speaking very quickly on I guess like sexism in media. One thing that I appreciate in this movie a lot is the sports match at the beginning of the film is not won by either of the boys teams, but is won by the girls team.
yeah,
Just a good little detail. I remember as a kid being like, why would the girls win? That doesn't make any sense. But as I'm older, I'm like, you know what? I'm okay with it. I in fact really like that choice.
yeah,
But yeah.
it's we'll get into it when we get to Golly and
Yeah.
Holly.
Holly. Yeah. Golly and Holly. They
Yep.
were real creative with the names.
Yeah, I think part of the issue is again time constraints. The last 20 minutes, none of the Toa have anything to do
hmm
because it's at that point it's Takanuva and Makuta and all of that stuff is going on. So you don't get resolutions to arcs that feel like they tie in well to the story.
Yeah. We also don't see a lot of the Toa. Like we're not introduced to them very well. We're introduced to
Yeah,
this like weird little dynamic between him and Gali, and we get to see that Pohachu is kind of just like this neutral party that loves everybody and you know iconic best friend. But like throughout the movie, they're almost in weird ways more passive than our protagonists. In that, like, okay, Takoro is destroyed, right, and we don't see them for a long time, and then the next time we see them, they're still at Takoro. They're not like looking for the Rakshi. In fact, the only time they like actively seek out the Rakshi is the very end of the film when they're like, "We're done running." It's like, why were you running in the first place? Why weren't you getting all the other Toa and figuring out? And part of it is, yeah, there was an element of um the they didn't know initially that the Rakshi had attacked Takoro looking for Takua. And then they
yeah,
didn't know that it was Takua they were after and not the Mask of Light. But if they figured out it was the Mask of Light or Takua and they were in the same place, they probably could have just sent all six of them and defended, or even sent like three of them at a time and defended our heroes.
yeah.
But
What are the
it's
Toa
okay.
doing that is so important that they can't go along on this quest?
That's a great question.
I do think it is interesting since we're talking about their characterization here to mention that initially the Toa were planned to be kind of distant figures, very emotionally aloof, and it was late in the game decision. I think even like the first online game, they're a little bit more. The characterization is very different than they are here, where they eventually decide to humanize them a bit more. So I wonder if that was a decision that kind of impacted, because here they feel like it would make more sense for them to be a little aloof, and that's why they just kind of show up sporadically. Whereas giving them more personality actually kind of contradict or seemingly contradictorily makes them work less well in the story that they're telling here.
Yeah, I think going back to their like the bones of Voodoo Island or boneheads of Voodoo Island, and then tying in with like the Maori culture, I think the Toa were initially kind of planned as almost these demigods or spirits
Mm.
that like interacted with the regular people only when big things were happening versus
Yeah.
later on in the story where from basically 2004 on it's very much focused on the main characters are the Toa. They're not just the heroes that show up when things are bad. We're looking at the stories of the Toa for the most part. Um and so yeah, it is just weird in this case where it's like why are they being distant when there's an imminent threat happening right now? And what are they doing while these two Matoran are just wandering around the island? Why are they not directly seeking out these Matoran to defend them if they think they're in danger?
Yeah. In Lord of the Rings, Aragorn has to go off and become King of Gondor. That's why he can't go with Frodo and Sam. Here it's just like, oh yeah, they're chilling in their own little biomes.
Yep. They just need their alone time, I guess. I don't know.
They need to recharge their social battery.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially
Now,
Kopaka.
well, yeah. So next up on my list, I have. Okay, so I need some clarification here.
mhm.
What's the difference between earth and stone?
We had the same discussion. I put it as stone is like surface rock, where earth is like deep down rock.
Okay.
Yeah, I feel like I see debates about this all the time on like the Bionicle Reddits and things like that, but like there's never a really clear answer. Some people that argue that like the earth element is more about like seismic abilities, like earthquakes and that kind of stuff. And then others argue that like stones could be related to more of specific types of materials like gemstones might fall under stones or like limestones, like that kind of material. Whereas earth is more of like dirt styled material, and then some separate it with like how deep the earth versus stone is. I think it kind of comes down to earth is more of a soft material, where stone is more of like a denser material. I don't really know where the line specifically is drawn. Um, Lore wise, it seems that the great beings that built the Matoran um, separated them out more so to do with what their specializations were and how they could serve the universe as a whole. Whereas, so like, the
Yeah.
Komatoran would be really good at surviving very low temperatures, or the Tamatoran would be very good at surviving hot temperatures. It's more about the environments that they would be living in. And so the Onu Matoran or the Toa of Earth or any of that are really good at living below the earth, whereas the Po Matoran are really good at living on the earth. It's not a
To
great
simplify it for
explanation.
kids, we have brown and black.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I asked this because I don't know if I'm getting the names correct. So is Pohatu the one who is introduced first at the coconut?
Yes. He's
Okay.
the brown one.
Okay, so
He's
I did
actually
have that mixed
stone.
up initially. Okay.
Yeah, let me
So,
I'll correct that in the script. Yeah.
so yeah, again, I was going in not completely up to date with the lore. So yeah, Toa Pohatu is apparently the most convivial of the Toa. He's like if we're doing the 5-man band tropes, then he would be more of like the heart. He's kind of holding
Yeah.
them all together.
He, he's definitely the brohachu, if you will, of the group,
Yeah,
where he's probably not the strongest, he's probably not the smartest, but he is the one that everybody gets along with, even if Kopaka doesn't want to admit it. Like he's like everybody loves Pohachu, but he's not. That's where he stands out the most. I think heart is a
yeah.
good way of putting that. Yeah,
He could
And
also
I
run
think,
fast.
he can also run
oh
fast, but
yeah, yeah.
they don't tell us that in the movie.
No.
I think
We,
he's the one who suffers the most from the lack of. They don't establish a team dynamic in this movie. They're just kind of the Toa are in their separate places, and then they come together, and now they're a team. But since he's kind of the glue that holds them all together, since we don't really see them all together all that much, we don't really get a sense for his character. And to me, he didn't really
mm,
leave much of an impression.
We also don't see him in his element. He's always in other people's places. Everyone
Yeah.
else, they show up at their land. He's there.
Well, Gali doesn't either. But she goes off
that's
to the temple to ponder the great thoughts.
she does ponder the great thoughts. Um,
I feel
yeah, and
like
we
I
do.
need to make memes with that.
It's such a good line. Like you have to use it somewhere. Golly is actually one of the few that actually we see mask powers being used with her. Um, we see kind of she's underwater, so we can infer that she's using her mask of water breathing,
Yeah, yeah,
and then she actually uses another Toa's mask power to levitate while she's pondering the great thoughts, which is accurate lore wise. At that point, they've all collected all the masks, and their Toa Suva allows them to access all of their mask powers, but it's not really explained. She's just kind of
yeah,
floating. Her mask looks exactly the same, and then she's in the water and she's not drowning, so maybe she's breathing water. Maybe she's good at holding her breath.
yeah, yeah. Maybe she's Kate Winslet in Avatar: The Way of Water.
Maybe. But yeah,
Yeah,
with Pohachu, the one way of inferring like his mask power and kind of his personality is that he is the one that kind of he's the one that goes to tell people the news. He's almost the Hermes of the group in a lot of ways. Because he has the mask of speed, he's the one that shows up at Onukoro to tell everybody what's going on. Assumedly because he ran there. He might have run there. He might have already run to the other Koros to tell them what's happening, and then showed up there last to be like, "Hey, this is what's happening," and that kind of thing. But we don't really see that. We do see that he's got a good relationship with Tahu and Gali. We see that he's got a very good relationship with Onua. That's about all we got.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Now, speaking of Toa Gali, she's the girl one.
She is the
But
girl
as you
one.
were saying, Toa, she is a little bit better than most of the girl ones. Because she actually does get stuff to do and a bit more characterization.
Hmm.
Um, I was pleasantly surprised when she showed up and she was the girl one. I was like, oh boy, what are we getting into? Especially since she's kind of the since and this is something that often happens. You have Tahu as the hothead. He's the fun lover, that one, and then Golly is opposed to him. So is she gonna like raid on everyone's parade? But no, she's more reasonable, but it's not presented in that way.
Yeah,
Um, and then she goes and ponders the great thoughts.
she does ponder the great thoughts.
I love that little levitation thing you're talking about. It's like I don't have any idea the lore behind it. I just thought, oh, that's a neat thing.
Yeah, I think if I was going to meditate and ponder the great thoughts, I would want to be levitating too. So
Yeah, yeah.
I can vibe with that. Yeah,
I
Gali is
I
interesting in this movie because she is the girl one, right? And Bionicle lore wise, like they limit the amount of girls that are in the story because this is themed for boys, but they do want to include the girls too that want to. But I'm sure ratio wise, it probably is about a sixth, maybe less, of Bionicle fans are girls. Um, so they give the girls the token girl character, and it's Golly. What I do appreciate is Golly isn't the not like other girls girl, and she's not the girly girl. She's just a Toa that is a girl, and I think that's all she needed to be.
Yeah, there isn't the same sort of distinction between her and the other Toas that you might see in media that's more concerned with gender in that way.
Mhm.
And I think since they're all like robots, they're yeah, it's a very different dynamic there. I do kind of wish there had been more girl characters here, but obviously that's not a priority um for this franchise, this quote unquote boys franchise, which yeah, it definitely an appeal is more sort of in that vein. Yeah, honestly,
Yeah,
she might have been my favorite character in this. I tend to gravitate towards when there's like the one girl one. That's the character I tend to gravitate towards. But I like that they actually did give her stuff to do. That was
yeah. She becomes an important character in the story, where like the story is very much um centered around the red characters because the red characters
yeah,
sell well. So you see a lot of Tahu, you see Takua, you see Jowler, but it does put her in a really important role as like the voice of reason early on, and then also the one that heals Tahu later. Um, which is kind of a weird way to heal him, admittedly, because they kind of torture him at first. Which I'm not saying he didn't
yeah.
deserve it, but it is a weird way to heal him. Um,
It's like, ah,
and
torture. I
also,
guess we'll drown him now.
yeah, exactly. They're like, yeah, freeze him over. Okay, he's screaming now. Let's stop. We'll try waterboarding. Maybe that'll work. Um, healing isn't a power that is presented in Bionicle. There is one mask of healing that has never been like used or like minted. Like it's never been made. It's a theoretical mask of healing that was worn by, I think, a Toa of plant life that's like killed off almost immediately in 2006. Um, but other than that, there hasn't been. So I don't know how the healing of it worked, or if it was just like, hey, he has like an infection. If we just like bring him to the point of death, maybe the infection will be at the point of death, and then he'll be okay eventually. I don't know. It worked
I
though.
just took it as magic. I don't.
Yeah,
He needed to magically be healed, and therefore he was magically healed.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I wish again with these Toa, I wish they had a little bit more space so we could learn more about them. I think especially with Gali, since she was my favorite, I kind
Mhm.
of wanted to see more of an arc for her.
Yeah, I think that's valid.
Now, the next one we meet is Toa Liwa, who is the Omatakaya one, if we're going by Avatar standards. He's the swinging through the trees one.
Yep.
Does he swing through trees? Close enough. He
Yeah.
flies a little.
Sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah,
In
I
his first commercial, he
yeah,
did.
yeah, he absolutely did. In this one he kind of does when he ties up the ash bear, right? And he like
yeah.
kind of swings down as he's pulling the ash bear up. So I think we'll count it.
Okay, yeah, yeah. He shows up for a couple of scenes and doesn't really do much. He seems to be like the peacemaker of the group of
Yeah.
the Toa, but again, we don't get much of a sense for that or for how he's different than Pohatu in that
Mhm.
sense. what roles are they serving on the team that are different? And it would be a little bit nice if the movie was able to get into that, but obviously they don't have a ton of extra time.
Yeah. In this movie, like, I appreciate who he is in that he, like, when he shows up, he's like, "Oh, hey, you guys. I know that you're doing something. Do you want to do it in a fun way? Like, I'm here. We can fly." And they're like, "That's cool." Kind of the vibe of like when you're a kid and like your older sibling, or like when you're in elementary, when a high schooler is like, "Oh, hey kid, do you want to like uh, play on my Xbox with me? I'll hand you the controller and I'll just watch now." It's like, I love that idea. So I thought it was really cute. Liwa himself is kind of, previous to this movie, is kind of a
Mm-hmm.
joke of a character, because
Mm-hmm.
he's the one that always gets possessed by something or taken control of by something, or
Oh, he's the damsel.
he's the damsel. Yeah, very much so. And so it's very like, he's just kind of funny in this movie. But
He's also like a little bit the wild one in other properties, or the funny one. Here, he's kind of the nature hippie one.
yeah, I mean, I feel like it's no coincidence that his mask is vaguely shaped like a marijuana leaf, but neither here nor there.
Yeah, yeah, that I could definitely see that showing up in the characterization.
Yeah, he's a funny guy. He also says,
Yeah.
haha, makes glass, which is banger line right there.
Yeah, I was a little bit concerned when he showed up, and his speech patterns are very, very close to something that could be taken as offensive. I don't think that's their intention. So I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt on that. That's also kind of why I brought up the Omaticaya from Avatar, because he has a similar vibe of like, oh, I don't know if this is entirely kosher, but I think the intentions are good, so I'll let it slide.
Yeah.
Here, I don't think they were trying to imitate any real life speech patterns. I think they're just kind of like, oh, let's give him something to make him a little bit more distinct.
Yeah, he has almost like an Irish-ish accent.
Yeah,
And they kind of try that with all of their green Toa in the movies, is to give them a little bit of like an Irish kind of sounding to them, but not dedicated to that. They don't really dedicate to that bit very much.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and specifically their speech pattern is tying two similes together. In
yeah,
On Matanui they call it tree speak. In Metronui they call it shoot speak, because of the shoots that they travel on. Um, Story wise, it's kind of like a fun little quirk. Like, oh, okay, they've got like a little bit of like a country twang to them, or
yeah.
you know, but like it can also get old if you're
Yep.
seeing it too much. So
It's Yoda in the prequels to keep bringing up Star Wars, where it's like,
yeah,
okay, he's saying too many important things for this to be working.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Then we have
It was smart
Toa.
of.
Oh, go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry. Oh, I think it was smart of them, as kind of the most lighthearted character. It was both smart and interesting of them to use him as the one to tell Jaller of the bad news of his city being destroyed. But I
Yeah,
think it makes the most sense because, coming from Liwa, he's probably one of the better ones to break the news to them, where they know to take him seriously because he's not being all happy and fun about it. But it's also not so serious that they need to stop their mission. He's good at being like, okay, there's something bad that happened. This is what it is. Continue your mission. I'll meet up with you later, but I do have to leave you now. And I think it was probably more of just a happy accident that that's how that happened. And they were like, oh, we needed some way for them to know that this was happening, so we'll use drums. convey message,
Yes.
and that seems most like a tree person thing.
Like the Omaticaya in Avatar.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Actually, I don't think they use drums to communicate. I'll have to rewatch that for the 11th time. Anyway, on to Toa Onua, the next Toa introduced. He buries some people under some stone.
Yeah. Welcome to Onukoro, he says as he drops Onukoro to the ceiling on them.
Yeah, no, he just destroyed the village that he was responsible for.
Yep. Whereas like Tahu was like, oh, we had to fight all these Rakshi and they destroyed our village and made it sink into the lava. What happened to your village? Oh, I broke all the support and the ceiling fell and now nobody can live there.
It's very like Russia during the Napoleonic Wars, just being like, oh, we'll just leave Moscow. Just bye.
Bye. Yeah, he's not really characterized a lot in this. He in the story is oftentimes like the wise one, the one that doesn't say a lot, but when he says something, it's very important. He gets along with anyone. He's not the one that's going to start fights with anyone. He may disagree with you, but he's probably not going to start a fight about it. In this one, he's just very much like he almost feels like a businessman. That's like, oh yeah, our minds are booming, and it's an interesting way to put him. But I think they were just like, oh yeah, he's the Earth guy, so he's got to be the like big, strong, manly man one.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was thinking, because I was thinking in terms of like 5-man band that he would be more of like the big guy.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, it is interesting to hear that in other media he's more sort of the wise, little reserved, but yeah.
Yeah, he's like the
Enneagram 9.
soft-spoken but like smart one, I guess.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Speaking of soft spoken,
Toa Kopaka, the
Woo!
Batman one.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
He's the most aloof, a little bit distant. He's constantly leaving in the middle of important conversations.
Yeah. I think Batman is a good way of phrasing it too, because it's like the good kind of Batman too.
Yeah,
Because he's not just like edgy just to be edgy. You can tell that this character is like the introvert one.
yeah,
But he's also like he's a nice dude. Like at
yeah.
one
He'll
point,
save them.
yeah, he'll save them. And at one point, Takua's like, oh yeah, I guess I just got lucky. And Kopaka's like, no, it wasn't luck. You did this. This is part of you. What you do is what makes you a hero. And I think like that's a super touching moment for Takua. For me rewatching it, like I was like, oh, that's so nice. He's such a nice guy. But
Mhm.
he's also like, yeah, you're talking, but I don't care what you're talking about, so I'm just gonna leave this conversation. So, yeah. On on top of that, the other Toa struggle to fight 3 of these dudes. He just takes them all out in one go. It's,
Yeah.
it's just the best.
So there's that whole sequence where they're all throwing their elements at the Rakshi, and it's like,
Mhm.
I'll throw water at him, golly. And he's like, froze them all of them. You're all dead.
Yeah. Yeah, he's got the best solutions.
Yes. Something that's not really shown a whole lot in this film that's very prevalent in the other stories is his rivalry with Tahu. Here, I mean, he deals with Tahu, for sure, very efficiently. So, I guess there's that, but there's no
Yeah.
battle between them.
Yeah, no battle, just torture. It's fine.
Oh boy.
Uh,
I am curious to hear from both of you who your favorite of these Toa are, if you have any.
yeah, that's a fair question. I think in this movie, definitely Kopaka.
Mm-hmm.
I think overall, Pohachu is just such like he's just such a fun character in general. Like I think he gets the most like depth, in my opinion, in the overall story. where like other characters have like arcs to them, but Pohachu's this constantly deep character where he's not always one thing, whereas like Tahu's always the angry one, and Kopaka's always the cold one, and Gali is always the reasonable one. Pohachu is like the nice one, but he's like he varies a lot. So I think Pohachu in general is my favorite, but Kopaka is my favorite in this movie and has a lot of really cool moments.
I'd say that when I was younger and mainly focused on their abilities, I liked Tahu and Lewa. Lewa could fly and is green. That's a cool color. Tahu, he's fire. Like he surfs on lava. That's freaking awesome. Plus, like he's like
Yeah.
the poster child in those early years. But
Yeah.
now that I'm older and I've read more material, I'm like, I kind of relate with Kopaka more. I just think he's cool. Plus, like he's
Yeah.
the Batman type, and I like Batman. So
That's
Yeah,
fair.
my favorite is still Gali, though. Kopaka has a fun role in this movie.
Yeah.
Very, very different from all the other Toa in a way that they actually have a little bit of time to explore.
Yeah.
speaking of not enough time to explore, we don't really get to see much of their dynamic as a whole team because they're divided throughout the entire time and have to only be a team for 1 minute to save the day, and then Takunuva takes over the rest of the film.
It's so funny to me sometimes how they'll last because like I would say the first like 50 minutes of the movie are pretty like solid and consistent, and the characters are making decisions that most of the time make sense to them. And then the last like 10 minutes of the movie, it's like Takanuva, like after they defeat the Rakshi with all their powers combined, Takanuva becomes Takanuva. They're like, okay, let's go. We know that Makuta has a base. Let's all go together. Let's beat him up. Takanuva's like, no, I got this. And they're like, wait, why? And he's like, I don't know. I got this though. They're like, okay. And so he goes in, and then he gets there, and he's like, okay, I'm gonna go fight him. Holly, you get everybody else. It's like, what? Why did we need that section then? Why couldn't you just say, okay, I'm gonna go there first. You guys follow me.
Also, are we bringing the entire civilization of Matoro into the evil lair? What's going on there?
Yeah, yeah. I know a lot of them are like unhoused now thanks to the Rakshi and Onua, but like,
So
do they all have to go down there?
that does actually make sense, though, if you consider where they were originally planning the story to go.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, when they make the changes that they make to the ending, it's like, oh, why is everyone here? What's going
Yeah.
on?
Well, and they also make a few references of, well, if we go down there, do you know if we'll all be able to come back? And it's like,
Yeah,
I can see where they're going with the story on that, but the actual way the story plays out is I think they do go back. They get their belongings and they prep for an adventure elsewhere. But yeah, it's weird. I don't know.
yeah, it does make me wonder how late into development they change those story elements.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, but with the Toa, it is cool to see all of them come together at the very end and combine their elements together. We see
Yeah.
all six of them using Tahu's mask power of shielding at the end to uh, encase the Matoran in a shield, and then they go and fight off using mostly just their elemental abilities. But it's cool to see them combo things in fun ways. Haha, makes glass, you know. It's a
yeah,
great
yeah.
it's a great little thing. But that's we get to see all the Toa do cool things, but we don't really get to see who they are, which is unfortunate. Um Mind you, the original Toa, they're they're pretty basic in their characterizations. They're very much, I am the embodiment of my element. If I'm a Toa of ice, I'm cold. If I'm a Toa of fire, I'm a hothead. If I'm a Toa of air, I, am a little wishy-washy, a little bit breezy, I guess.
Yeah.
Like it's very much like that. Whereas in future iterations, they play on some of those tropes a little bit more. So there isn't a lot of explaining that needs to be done for kids to understand who each Toa is, but it still would have been nice to see a few more interactions or things
It's
like that.
interesting. We talked about this with the Barbie series, especially, of often the characterizations would be a little bit like they wouldn't over characterize the characters as sort of a way of being like, for kids, these are toys. You are going to be playing with these toys. So they're just kind of giving you the vague structure in how to play with these toys. And then you go off and you have your own adventure. Whereas I think Bionicle is a lot more, because the lore is so big and at times unwieldy. It's like the playing with Bionicle is almost entirely divorced from the story of Bionicle.
Mm.
They're almost, at least in my head, they're like two separate things. And part of
Yeah,
that is that when I played with Bionicle, I made up my own stories. So
yeah. Well, and that's a good part of the Lego
Mhm.
experience is building your own characters and playing with them that way. I think in general, the complexity of the story kind of requires the gameplay to be so separate because, like, after this, the story gets much and much and much more complex. That it's like if you were trying to play along the story, it's hard because they're jumping between perspectives so much.
yeah,
But yeah, I think the first few years work well with like being able to play alongside the story, especially with the elements of the characters have the masks that fall off when you hit them too hard,
yeah.
or the Bohrok have the heads that pop out, and the Rakshi even if you hit their heads too hard, the little slimy creature on the inside, the Krana or Krata, one of the two, falls out. Right, that's the whole gimmick. But after that, the story it just kind of balloons, so it makes it hard
Yeah.
to do that. Yeah, in the last few minutes of the movie, the Toa actually just kind of become watchers, which is interesting.
Yeah.
They don't help with Makuta; they just kind of watch. They don't. They T-pose at the end, and that does something.
Very, very Atlantis the Lost Empire.
Yeah. Yeah. But it is, the story was obviously put in a way where they had to explore the entire island so that you can interact
Yeah.
with each of the Toa individually. And that makes sense, but it is, I know when I was a kid, a bummer to be like, oh, why do I have to watch these little guys when I just want to see the big dudes throw their elements at the bad guy?
Yeah.
But I get it.
So speaking of more little dudes, we have Holly, who is a dudette.
Yeah. She is
Uh,
the other girl in the movie. She's okay, learning the lore, she is really underserved by this story because she is a much more interesting character in the other media than she gets to be here.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, I mean, Toa, as you were saying a bit ago, like that she is this accomplished athlete, that's really cool. And then in the other media, she is an accomplished like warrior who can hold her own, and eventually, as a lot of the Matoran in this film do, becomes a Toa herself.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, there's just not a lot for her to do here. She's kind of off on her own journey that they don't explore. I just kind of wish, what if she had gone along on the quest with
Mm,
Jaller and Takua?
yeah. That would have
'Cause-
made for a really fun dynamic, I think.
Yeah.
It would also make the ending of Unity, Duty, and Destiny make a lot more sense
Mm,
because like
Yeah.
she only has one moment of unity when she tells people, "Calm down. It's just an earthquake. Let's go down into the tunnels," and they all do that. So
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it
It's
is.
just
It's fascinating to me. Like, if you're just looking at Holly in this movie, she shows up for the Koli tournament. She crushes it. Her and Maku uh, beat all the boys. Uh, Joller's like, wow, you did good for a girl. She completely ignores him and is like, hey, Takua, you did pretty good, which I think is savage and I love it. Um, and then she stays in Takoro that night. She doesn't go back to Gakoro. She stays there while the city's under siege. So she sees all of that. And then she's there at the very end for a lot of different things. She's there for um, you know, she shows up shortly after Jaller has died. She's the one that insists on putting his mask on the flying vehicle bike
the
thing.
ornament.
Yeah, exactly. Um, and then she also crawls into that, which makes it so much worse when Takanuva crashes the whole vehicle into the door. But she wasn't killed in vehicular manslaughter, at least. So she gets out and she's there to witness the rest of it, which is good because what happens story wise, and this is kind of well set up, is Takua is the chronicler for the island. There's nobody else, it's just him. And so when he accepts the role of being a Toa, somebody else has to be the chronicler. And Holly is the one that steps up for that section. So during the 2004 and 2005 storylines, when Vakama is telling us all the stories and small things are happening in between, Holly is the chronicler for that. When she's joining the other Toa to go on the adventure to save the universe, she is their chronicler up until she becomes a Toa. So it is a nice little setup for her in that space. But I do agree, she is just kind of like the girl rival in this. That's like, obviously she flirts with Jowler, very very flirtatious moments with Jowler. Um, but outside of that, she's just kind of like there. I don't know.
yeah. Yeah, I'm just like, I know they're doing the Lord of the Rings thing, but she could have just gone along for the quest.
Yeah, I think it would have been really fun too because like it mirrors how like you know Gali and Tahu have this big rivalry in between them, and Jaller and Holly have a little bit of a rivalry, but it is a friendly rivalry.
Yeah.
Um, and it would have been cool to see like, despite the rivalry, the unity in amongst those three friends and the balancing between them. I think it would
It
have
probably
been fun.
would have been much more complicated to just write her in throughout the entire story because we have so many characters. And then when we have to have our characters split up because reasons, well, there's reasons, but because of the fear of Makuta, her
Yeah,
being there would be a bit more complicated to justify. But sure.
yeah,
Um,
that's true.
Yeah.
Old
So
people.
moving along to Turaga Vakama. He's really the only Turaga that gets focus.
Yeah, we do see Nokama and we do see Onewa, but they have maybe like two lines each. I think Onewa has maybe one line actually.
Yeah.
But yeah, Vakama, he's the one that gives us the introduction into the movie. He's the one that like is the traditional elder of the village.
Yeah.
Um, that's him.
He's the quest giver.
Yeah.
Yeah. He doesn't have much else to do, but he will be important to later developments.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. One quick note about the art on the specifically the Taraga. Um, the designs are really cool in this movie, and we'll talk more as we get to visuals. But specifically on like Vakama and Onewa, they just have like standard like Bionicle looking chests. They gave Nokama boobs though. It's just like a sticker. It looks like, but they did, and I still to this day don't know why. I guess to make her look more feminine, but I just don't get it. It's the
I
only
completely missed that.
I'll send you a screenshot right now of it, but it's
It's-
so funny to me.
It won't be the last
Oh,
time.
I'm seeing it. I'm seeing Google Images here.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. It's wild. Now,
Yeah.
in the villain role, we have Makuta, who's the
Makuta.
villain. There's more to him in the bigger lore that isn't really explained here. Here he's
Mhm.
just kind of like, he's the bad guy. He's
Yeah.
gonna try and stop the heroes.
Yeah, to be fair, up until like maybe 2006 or 7, Makuta is just basically that. He is evil. He wants his quote unquote brother to sleep for some reason. To usurp power or destroy everything or generic villain thing. But we don't really know much about Makuta. In fact, up until this point, the only time we've really seen him is as like a weird amorphous shadow blob or a rusty Matoran. It are the only depictions that we have of him. So this is the first time we actually see him if you're going in release order. And so it's interesting. Obviously, this is the first time that he actually has a set as well. Like he's been released as a set, so they needed to tie him into the movie. He's just kind of a big, scary, grumpy dude that overestimates his own ability to play lacrosse and ultimately fails at that.
Yep.
But yeah, he does release the Rakshi, which the Rakshi set wise are really cool. The first Bionicle sets to have opposable knees, which is cool.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and beyond that, they just have a very unique design style to them. In this movie, we can kind of see certain aspects of like how they're made, and a lot of what is set up in this movie is kind of explained way later on in lore and how they're made using the energized protodermis, and it's interesting stuff. I think they just work as like them with the Makuta kind of just work as these are scary creatures, scary and powerful creatures that are a threat to everybody on the island. And specifically with the Rakshi, right? As Makuta is creating them in the movie, he says, uh, anger will mess with their unity. This will crush their duty, whatever. Each of them has an element, and the element is not, our regular water, fire, ice, rock, all of those. It is things like anger, fear, poison, things like that. And why they did this, besides the fact that evil sounding, is those the three virtues, right? Actually, kind of correlate to the different uh, cities around the island, the different villages. Each village has their own separate virtue. It's it's not called a virtue, but it's kind of like an offset of the virtues, where like um for instance, the aspect for the ice village is peace. So the anti aspect is the one that is the Rakshi of ice. So it's kind of a each of the Rakshi that were chosen to be made and used were directly to counter each of the villages and also each of the Toa in a certain way, based off of their philosophical beliefs, I suppose. Which is interesting. It's a cute way to do it in the story. Obviously, they don't really mention that in the movie that much, but it's kind
Yeah.
of cool.
Yeah, if
I
they had given the Toa more focus, that would have been an interesting element to explore.
Yeah, but yeah, turns out they can just all be defeated with ice. So good to know.
Yep.
Uh,
Yeah, that's really kind of it for characters. I I initially had the character score much lower, but I think talking through it and to all of the nuance that you bring to it, I had to raise my score a little bit. So I gave the characters here a 3.5 out of 5.
Hmm. I give the characters a 3 along with the story. Partially because I enjoy the characters more in later editions, but here we are here with what we got. I give it a 3.
yeah, I think that's fair. I gave it a 4, mostly because when I watch this movie, I focus on largely Takua, and I like the depth behind Takua, even if it's not entirely obvious. Um, I think they do a really standout job with him and with his relationship with Jaller. Though I do agree that a lot of the background characters become very much background characters, even though it feels like they should maybe not be. But I still think where the story is focused on, they do a good job.
All right,
Yeah.
and now we're finally moving on to visuals.
Woo!
This is very early 2000s animation style. It's like specifically made for DVD. The visuals have not aged well. I don't think that would is a
They've
controversial thing
aged
to
better
say.
than most of that time period, but yes, you do see the age
Uh,
of this one.
mm,
It's part of it
Yeah,
is that they're not trying to replicate human skin,
yeah.
unlike other stuff.
true.
Here, they're they're somewhat mechanical with a little bit of organic features, but it's really their aesthetic that really helps save them. Although comparing the characters of the films to the actual toy line, some things translate well, but other things are a little bit, doesn't quite look the same. But I'm holding a figure of Tahu Nuva for our
Yeah.
people to see.
It's very interesting. I recently have been working on, I just released yesterday a video where I did a bit of like animating myself for specifically Takua and Takanuva, and it led me to look at the character models that Miramax used um,
Oh,
a
we
lot
should
more
mention
closely.
it's not Miramax doing the animation. It is Creative
Oh,
Capers.
I guess
Miramax
that's
is distributing. Yeah, yeah.
that's true. Yeah,
Just wanted to.
that no, that's a good clarification. But yeah, the animators, uh, obviously, when the animators were working on this, they had been given prototypes, but they haven't been given the final versions for a lot of these,
Oh,
which is why they do have some differences. Um,
Makuta, his face being
mhm,
one of them.
yeah, Makuta's face, or his mask, was at that point a prototype of a combination of two masks, just kind of like superimposed. And so the animators were like, what do we do with this?" And they just ended up making his face the way it is now. Um, versus the set release, which has a very completely different mask. Um, they went with a kind of more organic look to a lot of parts, which is cool because they are supposed to be these biomechanical creatures, but is also like weird in some ways. Like you can directly see their abdomens, which is weird.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
so certain aspects of it look good, and other aspects of it just are a little bit unsettling. But they had to
Yeah.
take some creative liberties. For all three of these movies, they didn't have the complete final version of the sets ready, so the end look to them, especially like the Rakshi, where they have these splitting faces, almost like Demigorgon style. Um, the initial plan for the set was that they were going to have faces that kind of split like that, but they couldn't get it to work, and so they ended up just with using a solid face. Um, but I think they did pretty good for what I would expect the canon representation of these biomechanical creatures to look like. Though I do wish they looked a little bit more like their sets at times. I also understand like they're all wearing masks, and so how do you convey like facial expressions and lip
Sure.
moving and things like that?
Yeah.
They had to take creative liberties for, and so I understand that.
Yeah. I think for me, part of the issue is just on an aesthetic level, this isn't my favorite iteration of Bionicle.
Sure.
Um, yeah. And I mean, part of it is, comparing it with those early Barbie movies. Like, those were also very rough, but there would be moments of, like, oh, that looks really nice. That's not a priority with Bionicle. They aren't looking for, like, the nice backdrops with Walter P. Marthisius as production designer. They're just doing, like, it's Bionicle. It's a little bit more functional, a little bit more cool rather than pretty. Um,
I will say that the lighting for these Bionicle films are just way ahead of what Barbie eventually gets to, which is just
yeah.
surprising. I was like, huh, wow, that's really good lighting. What?
And the camera work is very dynamic. It's not early
Yeah.
Monster High levels of dynamic, but it is, um, especially for the action scenes. The action itself is a little bit iffy. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah,
I
the camera work.
It's really fascinating because this is early animation stuff,
Mhm.
early CGI animation,
Yeah,
I should
yeah.
say. And so you can tell that some of the physics stuff can be a little bit weird, or uh, some of the action sequences can be a bit off. The biggest thing that I notice is whenever they want to do slow mo, rather than rendering more frames, they say, nope, we've already rendered the frames. We'll just space out the frames more. And
Oh.
so the frames end up being really choppy at times for the slow mo. Um, Especially, I believe when he's putting on the mask, that's when I notice it the most. Is like
Mm.
the slow mo is a bit rough. You can also tell that they really the studio, it seems to have just learned how to use like clouds and fog, because they use them all over this movie. And I bet at the time they're like, this looks so good. This looks so good. Everybody's gonna love this. And nowadays I'm like, the fog, it doesn't look bad, but it's everywhere. That's interesting.
And it is worth noting this was not just their first feature film. This was one of their first Creative Caper, the company that did
Mhm.
the animation. I think this was one of their first times working with um CG. Now they did
Wow.
outsource
Okay.
a lot of the animation to Japan. Um I think it
Mhm.
was Japan. It might have been Taiwan. Um but yeah, the sort of an interesting first project, and I think they do an admirable job. Um,
Yeah.
but I have some quibbles with it, and yeah, I think my
Yeah, I think
favorite
that's valid.
visual in the film was the underground town. I'm forgetting the name.
Mm, yeah.
Just
No
like
new
the
Koro.
design of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That was the one moment where I was like, oh, this actually looks pretty cool and interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's valid. They have a lot of like these wide shots. They show off Takoro as well, the Fire City,
Yeah.
really well. And they, you know, it's depicted in some of those original games. And they do a fantastic job being almost entirely accurate to how it's displayed in those games, which I really appreciate. Um, Again, I do have some issues with like the biological look at times, but overall, like, for 2001 animation, first time the Lego company has released a feature length film going through different methods, and I'm sure this was kind of a rush production because they had never really done this before and it was just kind of taking off. Um, it could have been much worse, and I appreciate what they did to make it look as good as they did. But I do my one gripe, I think, is just that I wish it was a little bit more set accurate, and we see that Lego steers that way going forward, not just with Bionicle, but with all of their properties.
Right.
Yeah.
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 So I gave the visuals a 2.5 out of 5. That's maybe a bit harsh, but I mean, just watching it was not the most pleasant experience in terms of animation. And I'm hoping that the next few, from what I've seen of the trailers, and I have seen all of these movies before, it's just been a while, but I'm hoping that it's a little bit improved.
Yeah,
Sure.
I would say that it is. One thing that like early animation was just starting to figure this out, and you can see it in this film, is like the use of textures.
Yeah.
A lot of early animation just kind of didn't think about textures for a while, and then they started using it. And one thing that I noticed, at least between the movies, is this first movie doesn't really use a lot of textures. Like they do, but they're not high quality. Versus in the following movies, they add a lot more textures to their animation, especially just for their characters. Um, so I think it's definitely the animation company learning and
Yeah.
growing in a lot of ways.
And that's honestly the exciting thing about watching not just this, but the Barbie and the Monster High, seeing those slow progression over time, how they get better and better.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. I started out by giving it a 3, but when I took another look at the lighting, I was like, I gotta get it with a 3.5.
That's
So
valid, I
yeah.
think.
Next up, we have the performances. We already talked a little bit about some of the performances here. We have a lot of people from Barbie movies. Lee Tucker playing Makuta, Christopher Gaze as Taraga Vakama, Kathleen Barr as Gali,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Yeah.
my favorite Chiarazani as Holly.
Well, also, Lee Talkar is Makuta. Lee Talkar is, Bibble. So,
Yes.
That's so funny.
yes.
The range of Makuta and also Puku and Bibble,
Yes.
most evil of
Oh.
creatures.
Yeah, Bibble and Makuta definitely feel cut from the same cloth.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
agree. I think the voice acting, like the voice work, is pretty well done overall. I like the use of Jason Mikas for Takua is a very interesting choice because his voice is not. It's very particular. It's not a generic voice that they just used. Like I feel like Jaller is that like kind of generic cool kid, like the the one that you want to be when you're 10
Yeah,
years old,
yeah.
right? But Takua is his voice is a little bit softer. It's a little bit higher. It's I don't know. It's got a lot of personality to it, and I really I like that they went with Jason Mikas for that. I think it
Mm-hmm.
was a really nifty choice of theirs. It adds a lot of character, I think, to the movie.
Yeah. I
I will admit, at the end where he turns into Takua and they just pitch bend his voice down a little bit is a little funny to me, but it is what it is.
Yeah, I think I agree that he gives a good performance. Andrew Francis as Jollar is, I think, a little bit miscast, and also he's the one who's constantly saying Takua,
Yeah.
Cool.
which is no one is gonna be able to survive that role unscathed. Yeah, just a little bit disappointing there, but I mean, he does the job. I wouldn't be surprised if this is more a voice direction thing than a voice acting thing. Um,
Possibly.
yeah,
Yeah, and I don't know off the top of my head what the budget is for this movie either. It
yeah,
feels like a lot of their animation and their voice takes seem to be uh they used the best take the first time. Um and they didn't like call people back for like reshoots or anything. They were just like, this is good
yeah,
enough, I
yeah,
think. Um so I'm sure that they had a lot of budget constraints on that front. But
Sure.
even with that, like you can tell a lot of the background voices are just other of the voice actors,
Mhm.
yeah.
and that can kind of get confusing. But
Yep.
it is funny. I can't
Yeah,
believe they
I
had Doc
wish.
Harris in this. That's so funny.
Yeah,
It's a good voice.
I wish we had gotten more of Holly just to have more Chiarazani in this. She has such a
Yeah.
distinct voice, and
Hmm.
when she showed up, I was so excited, and then she barely had anything to do, so I was a little bit let down.
It's always fun to see more of our Barbie alumni come back.
Yep.
Mm,
Or in my case, the Pony alumni.
true. It is. She does have a very nice voice.
Hmm.
And I think I remember as a kid being like, "Oh, I like that voice. I kind of wish it was in the movie more." Um, but c'est la vie, as they say.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, I gave the performances a 3.5 out of 5. They're good. Nothing really stood out to me, but either as particularly great or particularly terrible. So,
Hmm. I gave it a 4 purely out of nostalgia. I normally gave it a 3.5, so.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I give it a 3 personally. I think some of the performances, like you look at Liwa, who's has a very inconsistent accent, or
mhm.
Kopaka, who sounds like he's talking like 5 feet away from the microphone sometimes, and you're like, some of these are better than others, that's for sure.
Hmm.
But none of them were like particularly bad. It was just like, yeah, Jollar's voice can be a little cringy at times, or some of the lines, if you listen to them on their own, are a little bit said weird. Like, okay, in the video that I was working on most recently, the line that pops out is, I was trying to find a good sound of like uh Takua saying no. And at one point at the very end of the movie, um Takua's like, "I'll take the mask, Jollar, and we'll run and we'll run." He's like, "Are you sure?" And uh Takua at some point is like, "Jollar, no." And it sounds very much like Christopher Walken, but like in a very weird way. And I'm sure that I'm one of like maybe 10 people who have specifically sought out that voice line to hear, but it is very funny just on its own. And so yeah, I think there are some takes that they probably could have retook and it been better.
Yeah. Oh, I'm seeing Christopher Walken hired
Hmm.
as Takua for the remake.
Yeah.
That would be odd.
That would be a great casting.
Well, yeah.
Moving
Last
on
up,
to
we have
sound.
sound. Yeah, this is kind of where we talk about the score and any other sound stuff that is relevant. I
Hmm.
think the score for this is really elevates it. Um, it feels very Lord of the Rings inspired. Howard Shore's Lord of the Rings score
Yeah.
So,
specifically. Oh, go ahead. What were you gonna say?
so before we recorded, I sent you a video to someone who removed the music from the film,
Oh no.
and it is so weird because there's very little sound effects used throughout the films. It's just silence, dialogue, some awkward footstep sounds, and it's like, huh, music is selling everything. It's selling
Yeah,
the entire scene. Like the soundscapes don't exist. It's just music, the dialogue, and some dialogue that's clearly they're combining two different takes into one. So, but the
Yeah.
music hides it. So, yeah.
Yeah. The music in and of itself, I've been listening to it on repeat this whole time, is it's just good. Like even on its own.
Mm-hmm.
I know the composer, Nathan First, was he said in interviews that he really liked working on this project because in general he likes working on kids movies because they're very much like the music is what tells the emotional side. It's very much direct and you can do some
Mm-hmm.
wonky and fun things with it. Whereas oftentimes in more mature films, it's the actors' performances that really drive the emotional side. And not to say that music isn't a big part of that, but it's just not. It's a little bit more subtle,
yeah,
oftentimes. And he can, add those like cymbal clashes at the right time, and it's very nice to hear someone enjoying their craft for this journey over an island that is honestly not that epic, but feels very epic with
Sure. Yeah.
how they use the music to establish landscapes and characters.
yeah. It reminded me most of, in terms of movies we've covered, Barbie and her sisters in the Great Puppy Adventure. Which,
Mm,
John, do you remember that one?
It was the music choice of being more like John Williams esque for
Yeah.
the adventure. Yeah.
And it's just like you're watching this movie and you're going, wait a second, I'm enjoying this in a way I don't expect to enjoy this. And it's entirely to do with the music and what the music is adding. And I'm a big fan of music in movies. I think it adds more than people realize, to the extent where I'll walk out of a movie sometimes and be like, why? I really like that. Why did I like that? And then I go, oh, a big part of it is the soundtrack. I wouldn't have enjoyed Slaughterhouse, the killer sloth movie, so much if it didn't have a great soundtrack. Or Barbie and her sisters in the Great Puppy Adventure would have been a horrible experience if not for that soundtrack. So, yeah, I enjoy hearing that. For me, it didn't quite elevate this as much as I was hoping, but that's less to do with the music and more to do with my confusion as to what was going on in the story.
mm, yeah, I think that's fair.
So yeah, I gave the sound a 4 out of 5.
I also gave it a 4.
Same here. I think it's wonderful. It's not perfect, but it does a very good job, especially for you know a kids movie, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that leaves my final score as a 16 out of 25, which is a 64% or a 3.2 out of 5.
And I have a 17.5, which is a 70% or a 3.5 5-star rating.
I have the same as John.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Interesting introduction to the Bionicle franchise.
Yeah, yeah, definitely not the perfect way to introduce someone to it, but it is a good way of telling that specific part of the story, which is like maybe maybe like 5% of this story.
Yeah. Yeah, we're definitely gonna get into it a bit more on the next episode.
Yeah.
For sure.
Oh,
So
before we go, we should give Toa the opportunity to plug your other projects
yes.
here.
Yeah. Well, the biggest thing that I've got to shout out is I recently released a video yesterday.
As
It's,
of recording, I
as of
assume.
recording, yeah, sorry. For people in the future, it's been a little while now, but it's on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/toalegend. Or if you don't want to type out youtube.com, you can go to toalegend.com because I have that domain for some reason.
And I'll leave the
Um,
links in the description of this as well for anyone who.
Perfect. Yeah, I recently worked on a editing and animation project um, where I did a parody of the video game Helldivers. Has a fun intro sequence that I parodied with Bionicle footage and animation,
Oh.
which was a lot of fun to work on. And then in the next bit, it might be out now. Depends on when this video goes live. But I'm working on a behind the scenes for the Schlobel stuff that I made. I say it might be out because I literally don't have a timeline for when that'll be done. The video is estimated to be 45 minutes long. It's been taking me about 3 hours to get through 30 seconds per day. So it's a bit of a struggle. It might be months now until it's out, but just in case.
Well, yeah, people should
Um.
subscribe to your channel then to
Yeah.
keep an eye out for when that
That's
premieres.
great idea.
So I meant to mention this earlier when we're talking about visuals, but in the Bionicle universe, there's a thing known as the Matoran alphabet, and it's just their own unique alphabet. And the films do a fun thing. Well, they'll add the letters in the film, but in the credits, in the bottom of the credits, there's a section written in Matoran that translate to no. No Rahi were harmed in the making of this film. So fun.
Yeah, on the inside of the Mask of Light, it says I think it says Technic Hero and then Mask of Light on the inside.
Mm-hmm.
It's fun.
It's fun. But anyway, thank you everyone for listening, and make sure to follow us on social media. We're Binging Barbie Podcast on Instagram and Tumblr, Binging Barbie on Twitter and Serialized, and Binging Barbie, a Barbie movie podcast on Letterboxd. And if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to leave a 5-star review and go to our Patreon at patreon.com/Binging Barbie Podcast. And we'll be back next week to talk about the next Bionicle film, Bionicle Legends of Metro Nui. Bye!
Bye, Barbie.
Bye.
Takua.